So tonight I'm going to be joined by Professor Harvey Kaye. He's going to join me at around 9:30, and we're going to talk about. I want to talk about his book, The Four Freedoms, briefly, but then we're also going to talk about the progressive movement in general, historically, and then project out where do we go from here? Where do progressives go from here? And I really like his book. I appreciate his insight, so I want to get him a chance to come on the show and share with us. So he'll be on at 9:30. There we go, Professor Kaye. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, well, actually, let me just introduce you a little bit, and then I want you to do some introduction of yourself. For those of you who don't know Professor Kaye, he is a American historian and sociologist. He is currently the director of the Center for History and Social Change at the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. He is author of several books, but the most recent book is the one that I've read of his, which is The Fight for the Four Freedoms. Professor Kaye, thank you so much for joining me. How are you tonight?
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Even if I'm feeling a little unsettled by the returns, I was hoping for more than Rhode Island. Let's hope we get Connecticut for Bernie, and let's hope it's close in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And in that sense, can I say something before we turn to the book?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've been listening to you. I liked everything you said, by the way.
Thank you.
And what I want to tell people, because I assume our audience is the progressive army, right? I want to tell people that progressives don't threaten to leave the country. They don't threaten to turn their backs on politics. Real progressives remember that history is not made in a single election. Okay, that the point here is to secure as much as we can in this campaign, in hopes of sending Bernie Sanders empowered to Washington. The best scenario is he gains the nomination, but even if he doesn't gain the nomination, the fact is we send him empowered to Washington. We imagine a coalition of truly progressive senators, and those progressive senators continue to encourage us. And later, I know you want to talk about the future of progressivism, but I want to tell everyone, it burns me up when I see progressives threatening to take the marbles and go home, so to speak, if they don't win this election. I mean, people are forgetting just how far we have come in this 1 year. So please, everyone, just remember, if you're progressives, you don't act like children. I just tweeted something. Think historically, not anally, and I mean that.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit, because you have a lot of progressives who are and what would you consider them walking away, right? Because you have some progressives who just quite frankly could never see themselves supporting Hillary Clinton. It's not that they can't get their way with Bernie Sanders, so they want to walk away, but it's a moral decision for them, and they feel like they just simply can't vote for Hillary Clinton. What do you say to
I understand that if someone believes that morally they cannot, that's their prerogative. Okay. But I've seen people say, I won't live in a country where Bernie Sanders isn't president. Or I've seen remarks like, I give up, not simply on the Democratic Party, on American politics, it's all fixed.
Right.
You know, here's something to remember. You know, for decades upon decades, for 200 and however many years it's been since 1976, it has been the case that we have had innumerable inadequate presidents, inadequate campaigns, corrupt politics. We've excluded African Americans from part of those campaigns. The point is that democracy is not just a process. Democracy is an aspiration, and we continue the struggle. And if for some of those people it means voting green for Jill Stein, more power to them. If it means they stay inside the Democratic Party and they do everything they can to get hold of the decision making and hold of the levers of power, that's great too. But it's those folks that I see saying, oh, they're writing it all off. That burns me up no end.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, though, and that's one of the things that I really with the Bernie or bust movement, for instance, it's the feeling now, and I have people who are constantly trying to convince me of otherwise, but I still have the feeling that Bernie or bust is, for some people, disengagement. And it's that disengagement that is going to keep the conditions exactly the same way it is today, so that when the next progressive comes around, that they are going to face some of the same challenges. And I like what you said in terms of grabbing hold of the levers of power, grabbing hold of the establishment, and even if you can't vote with the Democratic Party, empower the Green Party, empower somebody instead of disengaging. And so I definitely hear what you're saying, but I would you convey this in how have you been able to convince people that disengagement is the wrong way to go in this kind of scenario?
Well, let me tell you a little story. I don't know if it fits exactly, but I've been thinking about this last couple of years. I had a student here at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, who was a movement guy, and he said basically voting was irrelevant, and which reminded me of a set of words I saw on a train trestle in England, written by anarchists. It said, "If voting mattered, they'd outlaw it." Okay. Well, I thought about all of the folks who gave their lives to the struggle for the right to vote, and that goes all the way back to the workers' parties and women's rights organizations and African Americans and Native Americans and others. And I thought, okay, so let's suppose your individual vote doesn't matter. The fact is that you turn out to vote, and I don't even call it a civic duty, it reduces it. It's a civic moment. And you figure out that you're there with all your fellow citizens. That's a moment of empowerment, not simply by the fact that you're voting, but you're turning out with your fellow citizens. And we've got to start figuring out that that's a moment that we need to reproduce in other contexts. We need to remember that we need to create solidarities among ourselves. And turning our backs on the fundamental question of voting is not the way to do it. Well, anyhow, this student of mine ended up getting deeply involved in the effort to block a Walmart coming into downtown Green Bay, and he led this campaign, and he succeeded.
Wow.
And he discovered that he succeeded in part because he was addressing his fellow citizens as voters, not only as people who would turn out to try and block Walmart. He went off to graduate school. He's in graduate school now, studying labor relations, with the idea of either going into labor organizing or actually quite possibly going into politics. And he actually wrote to me and said, "Where should I begin my political career? Do I run for state? If I come back to Wisconsin, do I run for state assembly? Do I go for broke and a higher thing?" But here's a guy who all of a sudden is both movement and voter, what do they call it? Electoral politics. And that's what we have to remember. It isn't just a matter of winning the election. It's also a matter of movement politics. And we have to figure out where we're going, how we're going to recreate those movements. I mean, if I talk about the labor movement, I know the labor movement's up against the wall. There's so much up against the wall that most labor leaders and labor unions, including my own, which was, I'm convinced that they had asked all of us, we would have said endorse Bernie. They jumped to endorse Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement, is there even a civil rights movement? There are civil rights organizations, and Black Lives Matter, however, is the group that's really putting back on the agenda the imperative of racial equality and racial justice. But these things are happening out there. And what we need to do is have, we have to embrace movement politics, but also not fail to embrace electoral politics. And let's not forget, we have come so far. We have won primaries. I'm in the state of Wisconsin.
Yep.
Here in the state of Wisconsin, we have one of the most reactionary governors and legislators going, Scott Walker and the Republicans. But this is also a state in which Bernie Sanders mobilized people and won very nicely in the primary. I can tell you that my students, 18 to 30-year-olds, almost every one of them, whether they were white, Black, Latino, they wanted Bernie. And these are young people who are coming up, and middle-aged and older folks who are getting so angry, and say, well, if we don't win, I'm going, I'm turning my back.
That's
They're too impatient. We've got a whole generation of young Sanderistas. I think that's the term that's going around these days.
Let me drill down on some of that.
Hopeful, even if we lose.
Yeah. Let me drill down on some of that, because you've actually said quite a bit there that I think is very pertinent.
Yeah, I'm off on a rant. Sorry.
No. I appreciate that. I always appreciate a great rant. But so the engagement of or that synergy, or not even the synergy, but that fine mix, the proper mix between activism, movement, and then politics, right? Because it seems like we, to a certain extent, the more progressive people tend to neglect that political component. We are activists by nature. There are movements that have survived the DLC, that have just survived the shift to the right that the Democratic Party. There are a lot of there's so much activism and grassroots movements that have survived all that. But now, that next step is to gain control of the political reins. And if we do that, it sounds like what you're saying is that's what's missing from our calculus.
Okay, let me I mean, at this rate, which is fine by me. We can talk about my book another night if we want to talk politics
that's
tonight.
fine.
That's great. So here's the thought, okay? In 2012 election approached, I wrote a piece for Salon, and I said, now is the time for the labor leadership to call for a new march on Washington, so that after Obama wins the White House, we march on Washington and start making our voices heard.
Wow.
It strikes me that instead of everyone saying, oh, it's all over if it has to be Hillary Clinton. And look, I want Bernie, and I'm hoping something happens that enables that to take place. But even if Bernie wins, Bernie doesn't promise us that he's going to make things happen. He says anything that happens is going to depend on Americans standing up, stepping forth.
Absolutely.
Well, similarly, if Hillary Clinton wins or Bernie Sanders wins, I say we need a march on Washington with the idea of a celebration of democracy, and in which these diverse movements, which are plentiful, Fight for 15, Black Lives Matter, Moral Monday, the anti-fracking movement, there's a shared purpose in all of this. And the shared purpose in all of this is to redeem America and build a new America.
Right.
And whether it's Bernie or Hillary, we still have to do it.
Right.
We still have to do it.
Right. So yeah. I absolutely agree with that, in the sense that the battle is so far from over. The battle. Here's the other thing that you said that really stood out the most to me. And I don't know if people really give progressivism the credit. We have come so far in not just this year, but I would say since 2010. Since 2010, we have shifted so far. The national conversation, the Overton window, has been expanded finally to include some left-leaning discussions that we were not even having in the 90s, right? In the 90s, we were just moving so far away from anything that was progressive, any type of social programs, everything that was big government. This is the end of the era of big government, right? But now finally, we've started this conversation with Occupy Wall Street, just that activism in. And now we have someone who's actually moving that activism into an actual political campaign, generating millions of dollars in contributions, millions of individual donors, really showing us the potential and the potency of the progressive movement. And I feel like that some people are simply going to walk away from this, when this is the time for us to double down, in my opinion. What do you think?
I mean, if we, it's like one of these things staring us in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, staring us in the face. A year ago, who would have fantasized that Bernie Sanders was the most liked politician in America in the year ahead?
Nobody.
Right?
Nobody.
The most liked. I can tell you that I had students who, when I first knew them as freshmen, they were committed conservative Republicans. And whether they were libertarian or religious conservatives, who in the course of this past year have told me they want Bernie Sanders. Why? Because they're coming to recognize what's going on in America. And if we older folks, I mean, you're young, but if we older folks start talking, those of us who are for Bernie, if we start talking about, well, I've had it and all that, we're basically wasting a whole generation's energy.
Yeah.
We need to cultivate their social democratic, if you prefer, democratic socialist instincts.
Yeah.
Their lives, our lives, depend on rallying around this question and sustaining this movement. Look, Bernie Sanders said in interviews regularly, I remember one in particular with John Nichols in The Nation, he said, I'm not a liberal. I'm a democratic socialist. And the campaign that I'm going to run is intended as a political revolution. Now, he knew when he said that, it wasn't like overnight you were going to accomplish all of these things.
Right.
Hell, even if you had democratic majorities, it wouldn't have been accomplished in one night.
Right.
But what he has done, in the course of this, is he made certain words part of our vocabulary.
Right.
Yeah. Democratic socialist, political revolution, inequality, campaign finance reform. I mean, you know, I'm 66 years old. And this is the first time in my life that I didn't have to hold my nose even in a primary, I think. I mean, it's really that astounding to me. Who would have imagined, especially 18 to 39, 40-year-olds, talking about voting for some 74-year-old Jewish socialist who grew up in Brooklyn and represents the state of Vermont.
Right.
I mean, this is an extraordinary year.
You know what? I can't. I thank you. First of all, let me say thank you. And a couple of the people in the chat room are in our private chat room are saying thank you as well, because you're really putting it in a context that I think is so often missed, and I think I even missed it. Right, that we really aren't considering the significant gains. And actually, I've been thinking about this in terms of Bernie Sanders. Like the way I see it with Bernie Sanders is like he's really taking it on the chin. He's taking it on the chin for progressivism, and he's introducing things back into the national conversation that have never been in the national conversation in my lifetime.
Right.
And we finally are having a conversation about left-leaning, some balance, right? We're finally bringing America back into some, and we're not there. We're so far from being there,
not there.
But he's given us the language, like you said, he's given us the vocabulary, and he's giving us the energy and the model. I mean, we can't neglect the fact of what he's done. And so looking at the model that he set, what do you see? I'm not going to tiptoe around it. It's going to be almost impossible for Bernie Sanders to win as much as I want him to win. Let's say he doesn't win. What do you want to see as the next step? What do you think is the best way for us to move forward?
Okay. Well, first of all, I do want Bernie to go all the way to the convention.
Okay.
And I want him, as Donald Trump would say, to cut deals. I want deals made.
Yep.
I mean, the deal that I fantasize about most, I was reading somebody, I don't know if it was in Huffington Post or somewhere, said, Bernie ought to ask for the Democratic majority leadership in the Senate.
Okay.
Make it that clear. And even if he doesn't get that, he should demand. I mean, he's already a leader in the Senate for the Democrats, even though he hasn't been a Democrat. He's been an independent working in the Democratic caucus. He needs himself to position himself in a fundamentally a spokesperson-like way.
Yeah.
And in that fashion, folks, you know, look, the Democratic senators themselves disappointed me. I wanted Elizabeth Warren to endorse him. Durbin, all these folks didn't do what they should do. But that doesn't mean they're not progressives, and it doesn't mean they can't encourage political action.
Okay.
But here's the other thing. Bernie, and this distinguishes him from Hillary Clinton in a far more fundamental way, even, believe it or not, than a policy way. And it's this. Hillary Clinton, over and over again, from the moment she launched her campaign at Four Freedoms Park, and we'll get to Four Freedoms next time over and over again, she has said, I want to be your champion. I want to fight for you. Even last week when she was doing her victory speech for the New York primary, it said underneath on the podium, fighting for us.
Right.
Now, one of the beauties of Bernie Sanders' campaign, and it echoes a Rooseveltian, Franklin Roosevelt kind of politics, is he's not telling you, I want to fight for you. He was basically encouraging the fight in you. And Bernie has been encouraging the fight in us. And in that sense, the trick is, how can Bernie and whoever else is alongside of him, the state senators and other folks and the movement people, how can they continue to sustain that sense of encouraging the fight in us? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, maybe once the campaign is settled, and again, let's hope for Bernie, but let's realistically face the fact that it's going to be Hillary. Maybe then labor can rediscover itself because they've seen all this young and youthful energy. Maybe the civil rights movement will all the more embrace Black Lives Matter, and we can start bringing all of these things together in some. There doesn't have to be called a grand coalition. It's that we march together. We march together.
I love what you just said. That Bernie is encouraging the fight in us. That is that's something
that's been my motto for the past year. That's why I love Bernie.
Yeah, no, it's been so fascinating to see the amount of people, the numbers of people that are actually as progressive, if not further progressive than even Sanders. And Sanders has been giving voice to that. And he's taken it. And I keep going back to that imagery where he's really taken it on the chin for us to come out and be as bold progressives as he's been throughout. You know, we're just catching up with him in terms of his politics. He's been pretty consistent over the years. He's been very consistent over the years. And I love that imagery that he's encouraging the fight inside of us, instead of saying, I want to be your spokesperson. Even when he says, I can't do this alone, right? I can go to DC, I could win, and I still can't get it done because it's something that has to come from you. What do you say to the opposite side of the equation? Those people who fear that fight, because that fight that's inside of us is very powerful, and it can come into conflict with the reigning paradigm in the Democratic Party, and you have a very strong force coming from the opposite side of this Democratic, this left leaning, that wants to suppress that. What do you say when we want to them? What do you say directly to them? And then two, what do you say to those of us who are suffering the brunt of their backlash?
Okay, the hardest thing for people to do is take the first step. And sometimes you take the first step and the struggle you're involved in fails. I have to tell you that I found the greatest democratic moment of my maturity, my sort of, let's say, post 50 years of age time, was when Scott Walker and the Republicans took away the collective bargaining rights for public employees here in the state of Wisconsin. It was a major, major act of class war from above. Mm-hmm. And maybe you don't even know, most people don't, that Wisconsin was the first state in 1959 to grant public employees collective bargaining rights. That is, unionization with collective bargaining rights. I mean, that was a major thing. And here we were 50, and we lost it. Now, we lost it. Why did we lose it? Not simply because the Republicans pushed their agenda, but because the Democrats have for too long failed to act like Democrats in the Roosevelt tradition. Yeah. They have repeatedly acted more like Democrats in the Carter tradition. Mm-hmm. Sweetness without willingness to support progressive causes. Or, Democrats in the Clinton tradition. Yeah. We have a bit of time, right? Because I want to tell a little story about Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was elected in 92, and I wasn't very keen. My candidate in 92 was Harkin of Iowa, and he didn't make it through to the nomination. But Bill Clinton ran, and he ran on the theme of change, hope and change. I know we've heard of that from all these Democrats, hope and change, except for Bernie. Didn't waste his time on that, okay? Talking about political revolution straightforwardly. Anyhow, so Bill runs, and he played quite often on the fact that his middle name is Jefferson, William Jefferson Clinton. Yeah. And at the time of his reenacted, or at least traveled the same path from Monticello, Virginia, Jefferson's home, to Washington, D.C., in order to give his inaugural address in January of 1993. And I was driving into campus, and I was listening to his address. And I knew from his speech, it was all over. That we were never going to, that was all, now, it sounds sick and cynical, I know. But what he did is he said to Americans, playing on that question of change, playing on the Jeffersonian image, he said, in every, you know what Thomas Jefferson said, he told us? In every generation, Americans need some change. But that's not what Thomas Jefferson said. Right. And by the way, I am fully aware of Jefferson's sins. The more important thing right now is Jefferson said, in every generation, Americans will need a rebellion. Mm-hmm. But Jefferson Clinton said change. And basically what he was saying is, leave it, we're elected, leave it to us, we'll take care of it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then what did he do? He appointed Hillary Clinton to head a secret healthcare commission, or a private closed-door healthcare commission, which basically blew the whole healthcare thing so that we wouldn't get healthcare expanded for an entire generation. Now, having said that, Barack Obama did a similar thing. He told young people, yes, we can. And then he comes to Washington, and his inaugural address, and I thought, oh no, not again. He said, the debacle I'm paraphrasing, the debacle we confront right now is the fault of all of us. Right. Well, that was definitely not true. Okay. Definitely not true. Moreover, I thought for a moment that we were going to see some real, intellectual bravery in his inaugural address in 2009. Most people don't realize that Barack Obama quoted Thomas Paine, the great American pamphleteer and revolutionary, who said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again, who said, the cause of America is the cause of all mankind. Yeah. The sun never shone on a cause of greater worth, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, but he never used Thomas Paine's name.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, which indicated his fear, perhaps, of alienating evangelicals who, might have held, a grudge against Paine because he was a deist and not a Christian. Well, what we need in this time of ours is not to let Bernie Sanders fail to speak at the convention, and to speak to us in a way that, even if it's an endorsement of Hillary Clinton, reminds us that the future is in our hands, that politics is our responsibility, that movements must literally struggle to enhance American democracy. One of the great things about Americans that we too often forget is that when we confront real crises, and I understand the tragedy and the irony of American history, but the fact is we have made incredible strides, but not simply by sticking to our guns, but rather we are at our best when we enhance American democracy. In the face of crisis, we carry out revolutions. In 1776, in the Civil War, in the 1930s, in World War II, in the 1960s. And he should remind us of that. And by the way, I'm going off a little bit on this. That's been my greatest frustration with Bernie Sanders. That he has failed to remind Americans of every generation, not just who they are, but that they are Americans with a rich, radical, and progressive tradition. And to say to them, look, do you know why it is that you're angry about things? It's because you carry a deep cultural memory of the revolution, of the struggle for emancipation, of the struggle for social democratic politics in the 1930s. I mean, that's what I was so eager to hear him say. And by the way, I'm absolutely convinced that some of those folks who go racing over to the Trump side with that slogan, "Make America Great Again," that we could have pulled them to our side, "Make America Great and Good Again." Okay.
Okay, let me jump in there because
I went off on again. I mean, I'm just riled tonight because I'm riled by the fact that we're not taking the states that I want, but I'm also riled by the fact that progressives are getting too cynical, and I don't like that.
Yeah. In terms of let me just give the update in terms of the Connecticut. Connecticut is 49.8 for Bernie Sanders, 48.3 for Hillary Clinton. So it's still very close. You've said more than I can actually unpack right now. I do remember.
By the way, thank you for giving me this airtime.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure. I enjoyed your book, and I enjoyed the comment. We can always talk about your book because I want to have you back. But I do remember Barack Obama using those exact words. I did not connect that with Thomas Paine. So I do understand why there could be some hesitation in using Thomas Paine's name. But some of the things that
and Ben, don't forget, he had as his religious champion there was Rick Warren.
Yeah.
The evangelical from Colorado.
All the more reason.
Well, I would have, at least he could have done is talked about Thomas Paine in terms of, separation of church and state and all that kind of stuff. But sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no. I'm just trying to recap. I should have been taking notes. So this is what it's like to be in one of your classes.
Harvey Kaye rants again.
I have a comment here. Let's see, we sent our hard notes, but we are organizing and building. A comment from the chat room says that that we may be cynical right now, but we are organizing and we are building. And I think a message like what you're bringing is something that that really can bring it back into focus, because I see an opportunity. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to convey. I keep asking who's going to show up after November 8th. I want to see the people who are going to show up on November 9th. The people who show up for duty on November 9th, those are the revolutionaries. Those are the people who are going to help us to change this, not the people who take their marbles and go home, for lack of a better phrase. There might be a period of disappointment and mourning, but we have to get right back up and get back to work, because the things that you're pointing out, they're motivating, right? And I know it's not really about the motivation, but when you're faced with a primary loss, when you're faced with this type of disillusionment, you know, people really need to hear, especially from a historical perspective, that what we're doing is not only the right thing, but it's consistent with our tradition as Americans. It's consistent with everything that we do. When we come across a hurdle, if we need a revolution, we're willing to do that, and we have done that. So listen, thanks so much for coming on. I want to give you, I mean, I could probably go on and on and on about what you said. I want to get you back to discuss your book, but I want to give you the last word to give a message to progressives who may be disillusioned. You've been doing that all night, but I want you to summarize it into a nice soundbite for them to remember. Give us something to go on to all the progressives who may be feeling down.
Okay, here's the thing. Just think of these dates: 1776, 1865. 1935, 1945, 1965. The American Revolution, the end of the Civil War, and the making of the 13th and soon enough the 14th and 15th Amendments. 1955, Social Security and the National Labor Relations Act. Think 1945, the victory over fascism and imperialism. Think 1965, in 64, the Civil Rights Act, in 65, the Voting Rights Act. We did it. We may not win every election. We can redeem America.
Professor Harvey Kaye, thank you so much for joining me. I definitely want to have you back as soon as possible. And thank you for putting encouragement in terms of a historical perspective. We may not win every.
I do look forward to our very next conversation, not too long away, Harold.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks.